PFL is back at it Thursday night in a push for the playoffs. ESPN2, 9 p.m. Eastern. And let's bring in the natural to chat about it. Captain America himself, 1/3 of the broadcast team, the great Randy Couture. Randy, I mean, we could talk PFL if you want. I could talk to you about anything up and down the road. You're a legend in this game, but great to chat with you again. How's everything?
Very, very good. Just got in last night to Atlantic City to Oceans Resort and Casino. Ready for the weigh-in show today and the fights tomorrow. It's going to be a good one.
Rory Macdonald in the main event. Gleason Tebow is his opponent. Two names we know, two names we need to see. Ray Cooper III. A lot of great stuff there. I want to start with PFL in a general sense, though. I don't want to say I've been critical in the past, but there's some things I like, something I didn't like about the overall model. There's something about this season, though, Randy, where everything is coming up PFL. You guys are hitting the note from the broadcast team to the quality of the fights to the names on the roster. Have you also felt that shift that you guys are putting forth the best product, so to date so far in the promotion's history?
Absolutely. I've been very impressed. This season, we have 22 countries represented. The level of competition and athlete that are on the roster this year is remarkable. Obviously, when you got two double returning champs get knocked off in the very first fight of the season, that's a statement, and a pretty big statement. Anthony Pettis, a big signing for the PFL, also gets knocked off. I mean, it's pretty crazy. So it's been amazing fights to call and just fun to be part of this whole thing.
Yeah, no question. Claressa Shields making headlines. You have Fabricio Verdum. A lot of, like I said, a lot of stuff coming up PFL. The stats on the screen that people love and hate. There's all kinds of, the season format, the carving out a niche, and it's got to be exciting to be a part of that. Before we get into the fights, you did add another, I guess, legend. Let's give him respect. Kenny Florian to the broadcast team this year. How has that been with you, reuniting with your old UFC pal there?
That's been great, man. He's a wealth of knowledge and perspective, and that's exactly what I think he and I bring to the broadcast team. And Sean O'Connell doing all the heavy lifting, doing the play-by-play. He does an amazing job too. It feels really comfortable this year.
Yeah, you guys have been flowing. I've been shouting that out week by week. I've been really enjoying it. But we get to this Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern on ESPN2, prelims at 5:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Plus. When you get Rory Macdonald in the main event, it sells itself. But you saw him and you called the fight, Randy, when he made his seasonal debut for PFL against Curtis Millender. And I mean, this looked like the Red King of old. We know that Rory had some ups and downs in Bellator. He won the championship. He had some high mark moments, but he was very honest about the internal struggle. I feel like that's gone now. What is your perspective on seeing him fresh off this season's PFL debut?
Well, he seems to be firing on all cylinders. He had to make some pretty drastic changes. Everything was so locked down in Canada that he literally had to move to Florida to be able to get a camp in to prepare for his first fight in the PFL. And there's something about making that commitment, making that big change, I think that's really re-energized him. In some ways, he simplified things. In other ways, he added some new things to his repertoire. He got a sports psychologist. He's just been a lot more focused on what he needed to do to take it to the next level. And I think that shows when he steps in that cage.
Do you think we talk about it enough, the mental side of it in this game, in terms of that if you're not in tune 100% mentally, you can be a different fighter in there?
There's no doubt about that. We've seen it thousands of times. Guys that are hell on wheels in the practice environment, and then when it comes to walking those 4 steps up into the cage on fight night, they come undone a little bit, and they don't seem to exhibit those same skills we know they possess. And where's that disconnect? It's right here. I always felt like that was an advantage I had coming off the national team, wrestling for the U.S. and the Greco team. We had a sports psychologist that we work with on a regular basis. Those mental skills translated and transferred to almost everything else I did. And I felt like that gave me a leg up. And I think guys that miss the boat and don't focus on those mental skills are not doing their best, putting their best foot forward as a professional athlete.
In terms of your career in this category, maybe one of the biggest parts of your legend was your ability to rebound from big losses and come back and surprise people and have this comeback, the knockdown of Tim Sylvia and the regaining of the championship and all this. What do you think made you different in that regard?
I think I'd lost before in some of the biggest matches you could be in. And guess what? The sun came up the next day, and my family and the people that really mattered were still there. wasn't about winning or losing. And so finding that perspective that it's okay to risk it, it's okay to put yourself out there and potentially fail was something I learned through the sport of wrestling, and it carried over into the volatile sport of mixed martial arts. So, a lot of people talk about 6 titles, but hell, that means I lost it at least 5 times. My fight record was 19-11. It is what it is. You have to be resilient in a volatile sport like this. And thankfully through the sport of wrestling, I developed some of that.
Well, Rory has bounced back from his own pitfalls just the same. He looked great in his seasonal debut. Now he's got Gleason Tebow in the main event, but I want to hit this co-main event. Ray Cooper III against Nikolai. I butcher everyone's name. Randy, Alex Shotkin. Would you say Ray Cooper III is coming in there, defending champion, that if people aren't focusing closely enough, they may miss that this guy is looking just as red hot as Rory? And no disrespect to this broadcast, but I'm like, when are Rory and Ray going to square off? Because this is a fight I need to see.
Well, I'm sure they're both hoping that that's in the finals and not in the semifinal playoff match. Both guys on fire. I have been very excited to watch Ray for the last 2 seasons now. This guy brings a very particular ferocity to that cage. Every time he walks out there, I love interviewing him because he's just so blunt and so direct, and there's just no BS. And I don't know, that's just fun to watch for me. He's very intense. He's got a great wrestling background. He's state champion from the state of Hawaii, and he's got power in both hands, and he brings it with an unbelievable ferocity every time he steps out there. It's fun to watch.
Yeah, a lot of fights worth watching, certainly on this card Thursday night. Cesar Fajeda back against Chris Camozzi. Also in that ESPN Plus prelim main event, Antonio Carlos Jr., Shoeface, right? Shoeface is what they call him there, against Vinny Magalhaes. So plenty to look forward to. Speaking of a big name, it's been a big topic for a week now, and it's Claressa Shields, the multi-division women's boxing champion, the GWO, as she calls herself, made the PFL debut last week. You called the fight high risk, high reward in the end. I came away so impressed by that inner fighting spirit to never be down when she's underneath in the ground game, which she's a novice at, and find a way to win. Some people online going, well, she's got a long way to learn on the wrestling there. How quickly can she make up that gap in your eyes? Because she has the intangible qualities of a champion through and through up to this point.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct there. She definitely displayed the mindset, the resilience, got herself into a pretty big hole with Elkin in the first 2 rounds, literally in the worst position you can be in, certainly as a boxer, being fully mounted for most of those first 2 rounds, and finding a way to stay composed, stay in the fight, turn it around and get on top and really land some big, heavy hands from that top position. I was impressed with her, and I agree 100%. She's still got a lot to learn. And what I liked is that's exactly what she said after the fight. She said, man, I realized just how good this girl was in those things, and I have so much to learn there yet. So I just think she has the diligence and the mindset that she's going to get to work, and she's going to shore up those weaknesses. And I think by next year, it'll be interesting to see how far she's come.
I mean, she could do a lot worse than going to such a professional camp as Jackson Wink and having somebody, forget Jon Jones in the building, but Holly Holm, who has made that same transition from boxing to MMA. Part of the whole what could be next for Claressa, how quickly could she adapt, is the idea that she wants to juggle both sports. In boxing, I always give her respect because she'll go to any weight class to find the best possible opponent. She won titles at 68, 160, 154. She's even talking if she can cut the booty, as she says, down to welterweight in boxing, 147, she'd do that. Would you say that's a risk to juggle both, given the extensive learning curve that we know she's still going to have to continue to learn to be competitive eventually against the truly elite in MMA?
I feel like it is a challenge for sure. And I did it the first 3 years of my fighting career. I was still wrestling for the national team. So when I was in wrestling mode and getting ready for the nationals or the trials, my fighting and fighting tactics and timing and technique were suffering. And when I was focused on a fight, my wrestling and those small little nuances in Greco-Roman wrestling were suffering. And it was tough to juggle both things. Finally, in 2000, came up short again in those trials and walked away from the sport of wrestling to focus solely on mixed martial arts. And I think at some point push is going to come to shove for Claressa, she's going to have to focus solely on one or the other. It's just the way it is. It's just too tough to, they're so different that it's just too tough to do both. So it's going to be interesting to see how she weighs that out. She had a high likelihood of losing this fight with Elkin. I wonder if that would have changed her perception of her, her approach to what's going on. Even if you look at her boxing, she wasn't like that one that's going to go out there. She's not like a Nunes. It's going to go out there and crack and literally punches like a guy. She's not a knockout queen. She's got 2 finishes in her boxing career. So she's definitely going to have to rely on the tactics and the technique. She doesn't possess that amazing knockout power, say a Chuck Liddell or somebody like that. So
True. It's
definitely going to boil down to the tactical, technical parts of the sport. That means she's going to really have to immerse herself in the grappling arts, the wrestling part of this game to take advantage of those boxing hands.
Well, she's still young enough. She's hungry enough. We know that. And it's must-see TV from here on out whenever she does show up on PFL and ESPN. So good news for everyone there. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up another female superstar, and that's Kayla Harrison, who's already been a PFL champion, brought home the big dollars. But there's a different edge this season, Randy. How do you chalk that up? Because I've never seen her look into a camera and cut a pro wrestling promo like we have. I mean, the dominant finishes, you're always going to get from her because she's so incredible on the ground and she's a tank in there. But what about that psychological change this year?
I think stepping up and taking on the responsibility of her niece and nephew and adding that mother title, which she says is the best title she's ever worn, added a whole new mindset for her. And she's that much more focused. She has to juggle a little bit more in the family life to make sure she's in the training environment as much as she needs. She's the exact opposite on the coin from where Claressa Shields is. 2-time judoka and gold medalist in judo, had to learn all the striking stuff and all the other stuff that goes in our sport to go with her grappling background. That's the exact opposite of what Claressa's coming from. It's going to be interesting at some point in the future if these two actually meet. I mean, that's a lot of gold in the cage right there. So I'm very impressed with Kayla and her diligence, just her ability to put herself out there, put those 2 gold medals to the side, just like Claressa's doing. Same thing. That is very impressive to me, to have somebody check their ego and go out and put themselves in some strange and potentially risky situations. So both of them, highly impressive females for our sport and representatives of our sport.
Yeah, no question. Kayla, she's scary. She's been scary,
Yeah.
But this year she's scary. Could you give me a name, sir, in the PFL, on the PFL roster today that maybe a mainstream MMA fan doesn't know about, but should know about and should be following this season?
I think Emiliano Sordi comes to mind. Here's a guy that was literally perfect in last season in 2019, 5 finishes. 4 of those 5 finishes came in the first round. I mean, he was literally flawless and on a tear. He showed us some really heart digging deep in his first fight. We didn't know that he was still coming off being sick. He tested clean for COVID, but had COVID, literally had it, and said he was still feeling the effects and his camp and inability to train as hard as he wanted to train. And I think that showed in his fight. I think some of us all need to have that moment where, man, you've got to dig deep. And that's exactly what he did in his first fight this season. I'm expecting to see a little bit different Emiliano Sordi come tomorrow night. It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, definitely going in there against Dan Spawn. Good God, I should have researched that. Pronunciation police, get off my back. Randy, you have a very interesting position and perspective in MMA history in terms of labor, money, and all that stuff. And I did want to get your take on sort of the public negotiations and the issues Jon Jones is having with UFC brass about wanting to move up to heavyweight, face Francis Ngannou, but wants to get paid for it. You've never been afraid to know your own value, to be willing to walk away from the table. In this day and age, though, in the control that the promoters have, particularly the UFC, if Jon called you up and said, Captain America, what's my next chess move? What is it?
Well, obviously we're seeing Jake and Logan Paul kind of shine a light on the disparaging difference between what boxers are getting paid. And these guys are YouTubers that are making more money than a lot of MMA fighters have ever made in their careers, which is disparaging. It's it's irritating. And I think that's where Jon's coming from. You know, it's a big move up to heavyweight. I think he wants to solidify that in his legacy as a two-weight champ and really challenge himself. And I think that's a smart move for him. And he's right. We don't get paid the same way that boxers do. The transparency in the sport just isn't there. We don't enjoy the protections of the Muhammad Ali Act that was implemented in boxing in 1996 to create that transparency and protect fighters, boxers, from promoters and these very restrictive contracts, signing away their ancillary rights forever, all kinds of things that is going on that unfortunately are still going on in the sport of mixed martial arts. So I think that's where you're seeing the rub. I mean, when you sell a company for $4.2 billion, you kind of get everybody's attention, especially if you're a fighter stepping up in that cage and putting your sweat and blood into that, and you're not getting remunerated appropriately, in my opinion.
When you look back at the decisions that you made, they were bold ones at times. You'd be willing to give up a championship to retain, like you mentioned, your own rights in certain situations, or have the leverage at the negotiation table that you felt you deserved. Do you regret any of those decisions looking back?
No, I don't regret them. I was doing what I thought was best, what I thought was right for me, for my career, for my family. And, you know, I didn't get a lot of support from any of the other fighters standing up for my ancillary rights and the stuff that I fought for. And I think all of those things are now kind of coming to the forefront. And fighters at the highest echelon, those guys that are still making great money, are trying to stand up for our rights and for us to have transparency and to be able to get our fair share of the market and the revenues that are generated by every fight. I think it's that simple. And the simple amendment to the Ali Act and the definition of changing from boxer to combative sports athlete. And then there's some terms in there that are specific to boxing that would have to be generalized for combative sports because they all have rounds. They're just different lengths of rounds and things like that. It's a pretty easy fix, honestly. So they're lobbying hard to keep that from being voted on and have been for a few years now. Hopefully at some point, the fighters will association and demand some minimum criterias, some 401k, some different things that other professional athletes enjoy in our society. I think we'll be a lot better off.
Yeah, just going to need more people to take a stand like you once did to see change. You have to feel like we'll look back at these times one day as the dinosaur era, right? Like when we look back at Art Jimerson with one glove, we're like, that was historic, right? You know,
absolutely.
This will be that.
Well, you know, I think there's been kind of a Curt Flood type character in every sport. Obviously, baseball, Curt Flood changed the landscape for baseball for everybody in helping to create a players association. And we've seen that across the board. I just think we as athletes need to recognize what's going on, come together, unite as fighters, and hold the promoters' feet to the fire for transparency. That'll make a big difference.
I don't think you're going to respond to this question, you know, with a vain, self-conscious response because you're always so humble publicly. But does it worry you at all that because you took certain stands, they don't seem to be telling the Randy Couture story enough sometimes? I know we got a nice feature there on ESPN, a little series there on ESPN Plus that did. But, you know, with Uncle Dana at the helm, I feel like sometimes they're not teaching the new generation about everything you accomplished.
Yeah, I don't worry about that stuff. It takes care of itself. The PFL stepped up with their production company and did an amazing job in a 4-part series that man, I feel a little weird. I haven't watched it just because I feel a little weird watching myself anyway.
Wow.
But my family and friends, I got a ton of amazing feedback for what they saw. And that certainly made me smile, made me proud. That's just stuff I never worried about. I think if you're focused on all that and trying to be famous, your head's probably in the wrong place.
That's true. That's true. The career speaks for itself. I want to close with this because you had success late in your 40s at the highest elite level that I don't think it's really been equaled. And I don't know if it will be for a long time. Randy Couture today, what are you doing to stay fit? I know you're always ahead of the game. So what can you give us old washed guys a tip to try to, you know, keep looking good and stay active here?
Well, I mean, fitness and training is a lifestyle. It should be a lifestyle. It should be part of your routine, and just try to continue to make it part of my routine. It keeps me sane, as well as now trying to step in front of the camera, acting and stuff. You don't want to be have a fupa and love handles doing stuff like that, especially working with guys like Stallone, who's in his 70s and still shredded. So, just trying to keep up in that regard. But it's just part of who you are, part of life. I got to get on the mat. I got to train. It just keeps me sane, honestly.
Indeed. Great stuff, Randy Couture, the voice of the PFL, back Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern on ESPN2. Rory Macdonald in the main event, 5:30 p.m. Eastern on the ESPN Plus is your prelims. Captain America, it's been a pleasure, sir. Always great catching up with you. Keep at it. Can't wait to see Thursday night show.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on. Take care and be well.